Apparatus 5 Hydra. Elapsed time Omega-3 minus 633.19. DRU. Drusilla Hive World. Hive Corona. Her mother had called her Xalmgundi. The undercast called her Calamity for the disasters she had brought down upon her people. The bitch off-worlders that came for her called Xalmgundi soul fuel and witch breed. Her unnatural gift had killed them all. Death had driven her topside. She had left the underhive behind with the rubble and the bodies. As a young girl, she had little idea how to control her deviant abilities. Objects would move about her, seemingly of their own accord, violently if she was so disposed. What started out as a trick to amaze the caste urchins soon carved horror into underhiver faces, even amongst her own people in the delve, where skin was ashen and untouched by the sun, where eyes were large and black, where the wretched eked out an outcast's existence. She was an aberration. When her teenage tantrums brought quakes to the underworld, even her cavern kin rejected her. They drove her out with stories of her past. They told Xalmgundi of her horrific birth, and how, as a screaming newborn, she had broken her mother from within, shattering bones and rupturing organs, all with the cursed power of her unreasoning infant mind. Driven from cavern community to cavern community, Xalmgundi was a freak among freaks. Again, the tears came to quench the loneliness, but with them came anger and hatred. The benighted realm about her became a quake-stricken nightmare, and it seemed then that even the darkness shook. With tremors rippling through the fragile foundations of the hive, the world above came crashing down onto the world below. That night, the delve, home to the undercast for longer than anyone could remember, became just another pulverized strata in the hive's long history. She was hunted as she migrated spireward. The hive quakes had been felt throughout the city, and there were those who made it their business to know their unnatural origin. Xalmgundi learned to control her emotions and the telekinetic horror that sometimes came flooding with them. Her appearance, which many hivers found unsettling and horrid, still brought her to the attention of the authorities. But when they failed to bring her in, and enough people had witnessed the devastating power of her gift, the Off-Worlders came. Off-Worlders with gifts of their own. A silent sisterhood in whose mere presence Xalmgundi's more extreme abilities were nothing, and under whose gaze it was agony to exist. She had heard that the sisters had been sent by the Emperor himself, which their fine armor and weaponry indeed seemed to confirm. Xalmgundi could not conceive what the Emperor of mankind would want with her. Having sent his mutes armed to the teeth, she could not think it was for any good reason. The killing continued. Squad after squad of the sisters hounded her through the hab quarters and industry-scape of mill stacks, but all had failed to acquire their prey. Xalmgundi stared into the fire. She watched the tongues of flame flicker and dance. Her camp had been some kind of villa once, the mansion hab of an Imperial Army officer or palace official. The wind whistled through the dilapidated stonework and around crumbling furniture. The psyker pulled her ragged cloak tighter. She was used to the subterranean warmth of the underhive and the furnace-heated mills. The further spireward she traveled, the more biting the cold felt upon her thin, pale skin. She had come to Spire Pentapolis precisely because it had been long abandoned. The Corona Hive was so named because of the 5 minor spires that had grown up about the primary apex, like a crown. But it had been decimated by a virulent contagion hundreds of years before. Every attempt to recolonize the spire had resulted in a resurgence of the disease, and new measures required to quarantine and cleanse Pentapolis of its plagued inhabitants. So, the Ghost Spire now remained as a cautionary tale on the skyline. Too large to demolish, too recent in the memory to embark upon the next inevitable attempt to repopulate and appropriate the precious space. Xalmgundi rubbed at her temple. She had a headache. Perhaps she had been staring at the fire for too long. No. Realization shivered through her. The pain in her head had been subtle at first, but had steadily grown. It felt like a knife slowly slipping its way into her brain. She had felt that before. There was no time to lose. Xalmgundi leapt over the fire and sprinted through the derelict villa. She was light and lithe, but a short lifetime of being hunted had also made her fast and strong. She was not alone in the building. She was sure of that. This was confirmed a moment later when explosive lines of daylight shot through the thin walls of the villa, bolt rounds spraying rockcrete fragments across the room. Xalmgundi willed herself on. Her hunters had surrounded the building, moving up behind the villa walls. It now felt as though she had 6 knives embedded in her brain. The pain was excruciating, and through the crippling agony, she couldn't find her way to the part of herself she usually relied upon in such circumstances. The part of her mind in which fear and frustration translated seamlessly into spontaneous telekinetic destruction. All she could think to do was put one foot in front of another. She needed to get away, not only to escape being blasted apart by bolt fire, but also to get out of the sisters' overlapping influence. The walls on either side of Xalmgundi erupted as 2 more hidden attackers unleashed their weapons at her. The villa had become a death trap, a nexus of crisscrossing gunfire. Even as she ran, she felt the tug of stray rounds snatching at her trailing cloak. As ruined masonry began to tumble to the floor, Xalmgundi's hunters were revealed. Aureolent visions in plumed helmets, picked out in white and scarlet. They clutched their furious bolt guns and chased Xalmgundi up the length of the villa. She burst from the shadows and onto the stilted terrace beyond, and was blinded by the sudden daylight. As an underworlder, her large black eyes were hypersensitive to even Drusilla's meager sun. She skidded to a stop, putting her slender hand out in front of her hooded face, and it dawned on her that this might have been the sisters' plan all along. She was fast and agile, but she couldn't outrun a bolt round in the open. In the midst of battle, with masonry and gunfire searing through the air, her instinct had been to flee. Not a single projectile had managed to find her in the chaos, and now she had hit the terrace, the bolter fire had ceased altogether. Xalmgundi couldn't help feeling that she had been corralled, in the same way the underhivers would beat their way through the tunnels, driving verminipedes into the waiting nets of their companions. The sky roared above her. It was difficult to peer into the brightness-blotched heavens, but a carrier or shuttle of some kind hovered above the roof of the villa. As her vision cleared and acclimatized to the Drusillian day, she shielded her brow with the palm of one hand and saw the armed carrier bank for another pass. A silent sister sat harnessed into an open doorway in the side of the shuttle. She wore a targeting helmet, and in her grip, Xalmgundi could see the long barrel of some exotic rifle. The psyker's lips wrinkled with fury. The Sisters of Silence would kill her if they had to, but would much rather tranquilize her like a dangerous animal for the trip to their precious emperor. Xalmgundi would not be bagged like some prize for a Spireborn's wall. Once again, she was running. Her bare feet thudded into the weathered stone of the terrace. She felt the other sisters behind her, encumbered by their armor, but desperate to succeed where previous cadres had failed. The carrier had completed its turn and was bearing down on her. Xalmgundi could see the silhouette of the helmeted sniper hanging out of the side of the shuttle. The fleeing psyker peeled off suddenly to the right, allowing several rifle shots to snap off the stone and putting the sniper on the wrong side of the carrier to take another. Xalmgundi ran an assault course of decaying architecture. She hurdled a decorative wall before diving through the gap left by several smashed and missing balusters. The moldering architecture provided her with cover, but more importantly, it slowed the armored Sisters of Silence, who had to clamber over the obstacles with their heavier war gear. Rolling, she pushed herself back up onto her feet and sprinted for the terrace edge. The carrier dropped to one side, bringing it level with the stilted platform, and Xalmgundi could feel the sniper lining up her shot. She could also feel something else, the relief of knives being retracted, bit by bit and one by one from her stinging mind. She was drawing away from the sisters. Xalmgundi didn't want to risk looking back. Every moment counted. Every step counted. The last step counted the most. Xalmgundi launched herself from the edge of the stilted terrace and out into the nothingness beyond. Her hood fell back, and her cloak began to flap about her, and she felt the sniper's rushed shot slice past her ear. Xalmgundi's arms started to swing, and her legs worked the air as the psyker's slender body hurtled downwards, past the haphazard architecture of Spire Pentapolis. Below her was the mountainous accretion of Hive Corona, the smog-cloaked industrial powerhouse from which the crown of minor spires sprang. It was coming up fast to meet her. Looking up, Xalmgundi watched the carrier dive after her. The sisters stood on the precipice of the terrace, watching in silence as the psyker fell to her death. As she tumbled away from them, she felt something return within her, as though an amputated limb had been restored to her in full working order. She closed her eyes and willed disaster. The south face of the spire trembled. The agglomerate architecture shuddered from top to bottom, blasting a shower of rockcrete, torn girders, and gargoyle-esque masonry chunks into the open air. Like a pressure building down the shaft of the spire, the ripple of destruction vaulted debris and colossal rafts of architecture out across the sky with the force of a titanic explosion. Far above her now, the terrace buckled and fell. Xalmgundi angled her descent and hit the first spinning chunk like a cat, only to slip from its smooth surface moments later and tumble away. Clawing her way onto another, she was frustrated by a third colossal brace of rubble striking her temporary platform, smashing it into pieces beneath her, and forcing Xalmgundi to shear it in two with her mind. Snatching her way onto the warped length of a structural column, the psyker allowed herself a moment to focus on the retreating carrier and the falling bodies of sisters tumbling to their deaths amongst the collapsed architecture. The psyker fell with the destruction for a few moments before latching on to the busy flourishes of a passing wall section and held on for dear life. She had been fortunate. Her gift gave her extraordinary telekinetic power. It did not, however, lend her any extraordinary reflexes, and any one of the crashing shards of rock and metal could crush her instantly or cave in her fragile skull in a moment of inattention. Below, Xalmgundi could see the havoc she had unleashed. The base of the ghost spire was being buried in the shattered remains of the collapsed south face, and a cloud of dust was billowing up to meet her. As she plummeted down through the haze, the psyker focused her mind, concentrating on slowing the runaway mass of the great object. Her face twisted into an ugly snarl as she willed the beast into a gentler descent. Other colossal blocks of stone thundered past, only to shatter against the growing rubble mountain at the foot of the spire. The psyker's mind ached with the effort. Despite Xalmgundi's unnatural influence, the gigantic fragment still struck with unimaginable force, catapulting the psyker down onto the rockcrete platform protruding from the side of a dormant smokestack. Incredibly, she landed on her feet, but immediately felt something give in her leg, shot through with white-hot pain. She tumbled into a roll that took her down the platform's steps, and the world became a sickening kaleidoscope. Beyond that, all she knew was the thunderous white noise of falling masonry. The world suddenly stopped turning. A rusted metal landing had brought her to an abrupt halt. Her head was gashed in several places, and her arm hung numbly at her side. All she wanted to do was stay down and die. Looking back up the steps, she saw an enormous shard of buckled rockcrete crash through the platform as if it were paper, followed by a whipping tangle of support cables that tore at the staircase. She forced herself up, but immediately slipped back onto her rump with a cry of pain. Her leg was shattered, and bone was protruding from the flesh in several places. Trying her best to focus on the leg and ignore the various other agonies competing for her attention, she gritted her teeth and straightened the bones, providing a telekinetic splint for the smashed limb. Sharp fragments retracted back within the torn muscle, making it at least possible to struggle to her feet. Half hobbling, half tumbling, she made her way downwards through the thick, choking dust as the last of the southern spire face found its way to Earth. Soon, she reached the murk of a manufactorum dragway, though she could see barely a meter in front of her face. Limping horribly through the miasma, the psyker began hacking and coughing. The air was thick with powdered stone, and several times Xalmgundi had to stop to choke up stringy spittle laced with grit. Her face was pasted with clots of fresh blood. The post-catastrophic silence was suddenly broken by the rhythmic crash of rotor cannons, and the murk swirled as something unseen passed overhead. The cannon fire hammered up the street, creating two parallel troughs of mangled rockcrete. Xalmgundi half fell into a littered alcove, allowing the churning gunfire to continue up the dragway towards the smokestack. The remaining sisters were clearly no longer interested in taking her alive. She stared up through the swirling dust, searching for the armed carrier. If she could spot it, then she could use her power to fling the winged menace into the ruined face of the Corona spire. But the sky was just a blanket of shadow, and she saw nothing. As the cannons ceased, Xalmgundi thought it best to change her position and hobbled out onto the plowed-up dragway, but froze as she encountered a wall of dark silhouettes blocking her path. She squinted and tensed, ready to bring the adjoining manufactorum down upon the shadowy forms. Their outlines radiated violent intent. They were hulking and armored, and, like the Sisterhood cadre, they carried bolt guns. They fixed on the psyker with the haunted lenses of their helmets. An unarmed giant stepped forward from the imposing ranks.
Xalmgundi?
The psyker was stunned to hear her name come from the huge warrior. As the dust began to clear between them, she recognized them as a host of the Emperor's angels. Like everyone else on Drusilla, she had only seen such legends crafted in stone, but the plate and the weaponry were unmistakable. The leader halted. His ceramite creaked. She knew he had sensed her influence, the loose telekinetic embrace in which she now held his armored form. The Emperor could send who he wanted. Xalmgundi would not be taken. She would crush the legendary warriors inside their battle plate like an invisible fist around an empty rations can.
How do you know me?
She spat.
Xalmgundi, my name is Sheed Ranko.
The voice came again, deep and measured.
I assure you, we mean you no harm.
Rat crap.
She returned, watching him for any signs of movement. She ran her gaze down the motionless line of angels. Each held himself and his weapon casually, as if waiting for something. Not a single barrel was aimed at the psyker. Xalmgundi narrowed her grit-flecked eyes. This oddness only served to stoke her suspicions further.
Allow me to demonstrate,
the giant announced.
Sergeant, her pursuers?
Behind the leader, another angel brought up his weapon's scope to further enhance his optics and sighted into the murky sky.
The Sisters of Silence,
the sergeant hissed.
Brazen Saber Cadre, out of the black ship Somnus. Pursuivant Gerzelda Vim, inbound. Bring them down,
Ranko commanded. Another angel broke ranks and brought up the bulk of a missile launcher onto his armored shoulder. He pointed the weapon up into the sky and stared through a targeter of his own.
Acquisition?
Ranko asked.
Do you have the shot? I have it. Then take it, brother.
Xalmgundi flinched as the missile blazed up into the sky and disappeared, before the flash of an unseen explosion ripped through the obscurity like sheet lightning. Within moments, the wreck of the carrier fell from the heavens, belching a trail of black smoke and falling debris. The pilot was desperately trying to regain some control, but the craft was a smashed ruin. It cut through a tall metal chimney before passing over their heads and crashing into the facade of the manufactorum. Its disappearance in the dust-choked distance was swiftly followed by a further explosion, and the sounds of hull shrapnel ringing off the rockcrete walls. Xalmgundi almost faltered and had to reach out to steady herself. She brought her attention back to the angel who called himself Sheed Ranko.
Sergeant,
he said, not taking his glowering optics from the psyker.
Take 2 legionnaires and finish off any remaining sisters.
The angel left the wall of shadow with 2 of his hulking comrades, but Ranko addressed her again.
Aren't you tired of being hunted?
I can take care of myself,
the psyker shot back savagely.
Prove it,
Ranko challenged her. Xalmgundi's lip curled. She turned and looked up at the pinnacle of the Corona spire, just beginning to emerge from the great bank of dust. Her eyes narrowed. Her pupils became stabbing points of darkness. The derelict spire gave a thunder crack of internal agony. The pinnacle began to shake as a deep rumble built from within the accreted nightmare of the ghost spire's already weakened foundations, and loose chips of stone shook around their feet. Xalmgundi's jaw became taut with destructive desire. The pinnacle suddenly disappeared. Like an unfortunate underworlder in a sinkhole, the spire dropped down below the haze. Every living soul within 50 kilometers would have heard the pulverizing boom of successive floors and constructs falling in on themselves. The spire was collapsing straight down. Like a black hole, some irresistible gravitational force was dragging an avalanche of girders, buttresses, and crumbling stone downwards through the guts of the structure. As it fell inwards upon itself, the colossal city spire sent a cloud of dust and debris into the sky. The sound was excruciating. Shearing metal, ancient stone cracked asunder. The ear-bleeding roar of the spire's sheer mass crashing down into the hive below. Xalmgundi stood with the Emperor's angels as the collapsing agglomeration drove a blizzard of ancient dust and grit down the narrow dragway. Ranko asked for the magnoculars. He brought them up to survey the new mountain of scrap and rubble Xalmgundi had created from the ancient spire, just with the power of her mind.
My word, it seems you can take care of yourself,
Ranko said to her, obviously impressed.
Can you also take care of other things, for other people, I wonder?